Hello and thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. Here's a look at some of the stories we've been covering for you today. The 40-year inflation rate is getting the attention of Senate Democrats. Senate Leader Chuck Schumer says they're focused on finding solutions. We take a look at what they're saying. NATO officials said Moscow is still adding troops to its buildup around the Eastern European nation. The White House says they're watching very closely. The vaccine mandates have trickled down through all aspects of society, but in certain areas, even in blue states, where the mandates have taken root, there's been significant pushback and state and local officials have begun rolling back these mandates. But why now? In Washington, D.C., all hands are on deck to address inflation. The Federal Reserve, the White House, and Congress are now contemplating solutions. It's clear that the 40-year high rate is getting the attention of Senate Democrats. Senate Leader Chuck Schumer said earlier today that Democrats are now laser focused on lowering costs. But what are they going to do? NTD's Melina Wisecup reports.
All signs show that elevated inflation rates are not going away anytime soon. Wholesale prices spiked nearly 10% in January.
These challenges demand action, and Democrats remain laser focused on lowering costs.
Democrats made a very noticeable pivot yesterday. I don't know if you noticed this, but starting with Senator Schumer's floor remarks, but throughout the day, all of a sudden they're starting to talk about inflation.
The Federal Reserve plans to raise interest rates if inflation doesn't cool off. That'll make everyone pay more in interest on loans, with the goal to reduce the amount of money circulating in the economy.
About 6 months late, but they're doing it, so maybe they're doing what they can do to get it under control.
So what ideas have Democrats brought to the table so far? One is a gas tax. That means pushing the pause button on the federal tax charged on gasoline.
But friends of mine call me that tell me they don't want to come into city no more because the gas price is through the roof.
So I'm not going out to see friends as often. I'm not going out to concerts.
President Biden this week telling the American people he understands the urgency of lowering inflation. Again, pitching his Build Back Better bill as the best possible solution.
And if you're in a working class family, it hurts. That's why my Build Back Better plan, what it's all about. Look, families are getting clobbered.
While that bill is still stalled, Democrats are now looking at breaking it up into pieces to see what, from the nearly $2 trillion bill, can pass in the gridlocked Senate. Democrats say the bill will ease inflation burdens on working Americans by lowering prescription drug costs and the cost of childcare, but Republicans are skeptical.
They, for example, proposed doubling the cost of childcare and then subsidizing the doubled cost of childcare. It's absolutely preposterous.
And Senator Schumer is expressing disappointment that Republicans have not brought solutions of their own to the table.
But Democrats are the ones laser focused on showing where we stand and offering solutions that aim squarely at the problem. Republicans seem to have no solutions, just rhetoric.
So, Melina, what can you tell us about how lawmakers are working on this issue right now? Are there any efforts that have bipartisan support? And when can we expect some action?
Well, we can expect to start seeing some action from members of Congress over the next couple of weeks. Senate Leader Schumer says that we can expect to see a lot of floor activity to address this issue come March. Now, March is also when the Federal Reserve is expected to raise interest rates in a bid to tackle this growing inflation issue. Another solution that Senate Democrats have proposed is putting a pause on the gas tax, but that's actually drawn opposition already. Some critics say that it will have little impact on lowering costs, and others are questioning the authenticity of this proposal because this bill was introduced by a few vulnerable Senate Democrats who are up for re-election. So the question does come as whether or not this is a genuine proposal to lower costs. Now, another solution that lawmakers are working on right now is passing that CHIPS Act, and what that will do is it will increase the production and manufacturing of those computer chips, and that will ease the supply chain. That will lower costs for things like cars and other products that use those semiconductors. Now, this is something that does have bipartisan support, and Senator Crapo particularly today says he hopes this is something that can be passed quickly. Steve?
Melina Wisecup reporting. And the Biden administration is asking Congress to appropriate $30 billion to deal with future pandemic challenges, including the possibility of new variants. Health Secretary Javier Becerra told lawmakers that funding is needed to maintain pandemic health response measures and invest in the new development of future vaccines. Health officials told lawmakers that additional variants will follow Omicron. Money to combat the virus may be included in a bipartisan 2022 federal funding package. Governor Glenn Youngkin signs a bill ending school mask mandates. On March 1st, Virginia parents will have the option of letting kids go to school without wearing a mask. In January, Governor Youngkin issued an executive order to repeal the mandate, but a few school boards challenged the order. After the executive order, some students in Fairfax and Loudoun County were suspended for not wearing a mask. And Woodgrove High School in Loudoun County made headlines after suspending an Eagle Scout for 10 days.
Here we have school boards that are actually making it hard for kids to come to school. They won't let them come to school. This is exactly what parents across America and parents across Virginia are standing up and saying, no more, we're going to elect different folks.
As state and local governments across the nation lifted indoor mask mandates, the CDC is not changing its guidance on masking.
We want to give people a break from things like mask wearing when these metrics are better, and then have the ability to reach for them again should things worsen. However, it's also important to remember, regardless of the level of disease burden in your community, there are still very important times to continue to wear your mask.
The U.S. has seen COVID infections and hospitalizations plummet. Cases have plunged from nearly 460,000 a day 2 weeks ago to 150,000 on Monday. COVID hospitalizations have fallen 45% from peaking 1 month ago. Multiple Democratic-run cities that have put in place some of the country's harshest mandates and pandemic restrictions are starting to roll them back, raising questions if polling is starting to show that harsh mandates are becoming a political hot potato. To try and figure it all out, we're happy to have Oklahoma candidate for United States Senate, Jackson Lahmeyer. Jackson Lahmeyer, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. It's a real honor.
Absolutely. Now, Jackson, I want to ask you about the vaccine mandates. Washington, D.C.'s requirement to show proof of vaccine indoors only lasted about a month, and it was lifted or done away with yesterday. Philadelphia has just announced they're dropping their requirements. Why do you think we're seeing these on-again, off-again policies?
Well, people are starting to fight back. You know, on September the 9th, when former Vice President Joe Biden declared war on the American people by saying, you'll either take this vaccine or you're going to lose your job. You know, my team, we went to work. And since September the 9th, I have personally signed over 55,000 COVID-19 religious exemption forms, helping thousands of people keep their jobs without taking the jab. You know, I'm a pastor here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, but I've signed 55,000 across the country. People are fighting back, and that's the important thing. This is the United States of America. This is not communist China. This is not the old Soviet Union. This is the U.S. of A. We have to stand our ground, and these Democratic leaders, they're starting to see the American people fight back, and we're seeing it in Canada. It's a beautiful thing.
Now, I'm going to ask you about Canada in just a moment, but a slightly different situation in New York where we're seeing about 1,500 municipal workers are being fired for not taking the jab. What if hundreds of these folks actually have what's called naturally acquired immunity, where they've had the virus and their bodies are now protected? Is there an argument for naturally acquired immunity to be recognized?
Absolutely. Here's what we know. Natural immunity is a greater defense against COVID-19 than inoculation. We know that. We know that. You've got people who have taken 2 jabs and 4 boosters, and they're still catching the virus. They're still catching it. Natural immunity is very strong against COVID-19. The only drawback is with natural immunity is it's free. F-R-E-E. It doesn't make big money for big pharma. You know, COVID-19 has been a tremendous get-rich-quick scheme for big pharma and many of our political leaders. When natural immunity, it works. These individuals, they should not be losing their job because they have chosen not to take the vaccine, especially when they have natural immunity.
Now, you touched on Canada there. The truckers up there have taken quite a stand on the mandates, enacting some change of their own on the provincial level. But things have also gotten a little bit tense and tightened on the national level by Trudeau and his administration. How close to home does what's happening in Canada hit to you?
Well, here's what I think is interesting. What we're seeing in Canada is a warning of what's going to be coming here to America. Justin Trudeau is showing his true colors, and that's what tyrants do when they get pushed up against the wall. These truckers have said enough is enough, and they've taken a stand. Now, here's what's interesting. I can't confirm this, but I haven't seen one building that the truckers have set on fire. Not one building. Now, if this was Black Lives Matter and they were protesting whatever, and they were burning down buildings, we would have political leaders raising funds to get them out of jail. But when you've got a group of truckers who are the backbone of Canada and the United States of America, you remove the truckers, you're going to have big problems. Yet these truckers don't burn down a single building. Somehow, though, they're considered terrorists, terrorizing Canada, and then you got speculations of what's coming here in America. We need to recognize that these truckers are doing this for a purpose, and that purpose is they're standing up for freedom, and we need to get behind them, and we need to support them.
Now, Jackson, I just want to transition a little bit here and ask you about the border crisis. You're just one state away from Texas, which is on the front lines of this battle, being in Oklahoma. How does the situation at the border affect non-border states?
Well, here's the thing. It affects us directly and indirectly. You have the economic impact that it places upon, the burden that it places upon so many different states. But the biggest problem, nobody wants to talk about it, and I don't understand why people don't want to talk about it, is with the southern border. Yes, we understand illegals coming over here, taking American jobs. We get that. But the biggest problem nobody talks about is child sex trafficking that takes place at that southern border that impacts all of us in this country. You have so many children that go missing in the United States of America every single year. And it's tied in to the crisis at our southern border. Not only that, you have drugs that are pouring in, fentanyl like nobody's ever seen before, pouring in to the United States of America. This is a massive problem. It's an invasion at our southern border. We need to finish the wall. We need to empower Border Patrol because we have a national security crisis at our southern border. It impacts us economically, but it also impacts us in so many different areas, one of them being child sex trafficking.
Candidate for United States Senate Jackson Lahmeyer, thank you.
Thank you.
A day after Russia said it pulled some of its forces away from the Ukrainian border, NATO officials said Moscow is still adding troops to its buildup around the Eastern European nation. President Joe Biden issued a warning on Tuesday. If Russia does invade in the days and weeks ahead, the human cost for Ukraine will be immense, and the strategic cost for Russia will likewise be large. Senate Republican Minority Leader Mitch McConnell appreciated much of Biden's remarks.
The U.S. and our partners should waste no time in helping Ukraine prepare for war. Weapons, material, advice, logistics, and intelligence.
Republican Congressman Glenn Grothman, member of the House Subcommittee on National Security, said the Biden administration should have implemented stronger sanctions against Russia.
The Biden administration has spent months trying to defuse the situation with little or no success. That is because the President and Secretary Blinken are doing so from a position of weakness.
And White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki says the U.S. is watching very closely what steps Russia is taking. Did China live up to its trade commitments? The answer is no. We bring you details of the Biden administration's first assessment of China's compliance with the World Trade Organization. As member of the House Financial Services Committee, Congressman Warren Davidson weighs in on rising inflation. He also tells us what needs to be done to turn China into a productive trading partner.
For Washington, D.C. is very unusual.
Shen Performing Arts has arrived in the nation's capital, set to perform 8 shows at the Kennedy Center. The Biden administration today released its first assessment of China's compliance with the World Trade Organization. Did China live up to its promises made to get into foreign markets in the first place? And what about now? NTD's Iris Tao has more.
China has violated commitments it made both 20 years ago and recently. In a new report released Wednesday, the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative details how China has failed to deliver on a wide array of trade commitments, including ones it made in 2001 to first open up its markets to the West, and others under the 2020 trade deal.
Made clear that the Phase 1 deal did not address the core problems with China's state-led economy and harmful economic practices. USTR, since that period of time, has been making a concerted effort to see if China will show serious intent to make good on their purchase commitments. But the fact that they have not met those illustrates the limitations of the framework we inherited.
The criticism comes as the U.S. releases its annual report on China's compliance with WTO rules, the first such report under Biden. U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai says China flouted free market principles and instead expanded its state-led approach, causing harm to workers and businesses around the world. The U.S. has repeatedly called for China to keep its promises. Here's Tai back in October.
For too long, China's lack of adherence to global trading norms has undercut the prosperity of Americans and others around the world. In recent years, Beijing has doubled down on its state-centered economic system.
Despite the calls, the latest data shows China ended up buying only about half of the U.S. products it had promised to buy. And House Republicans are now urging Biden to take immediate action. 60 of them sent a letter on Tuesday asking Biden to address China's $16 billion shortfalls in agricultural purchases. They're warning that a lack of enforcement action will set a precedent that will be detrimental for future trade negotiations. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Iris Tao, NTD News.
As we reported yesterday, inflation has been soaring, with wholesale prices shooting up well past Wall Street's estimates. Here to discuss with us, we're happy to have on member of the House Financial Services Committee, Congressman Warren Davidson. Congressman Warren Davidson, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Yeah, thank you. It's always nice to join you.
Now, Congressman, inflation has been talked about for months now. Some key indicators like wholesale prices are still continuing to surge, exceeding Wall Street's expectations. In your opinion, is there any light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, I think there's light. The question is, how long's the tunnel? And of course, the challenge for the Federal Reserve has been, they're still buying mortgage-backed securities. They're still buying treasuries, so furthering the economic distortion. And the challenge also for the Fed is Congress keeps spending more money than America collects in taxes, and frankly, more than other countries or financial institutions want to lend us. So in a way, they're forced to grow their balance sheet, which is now over $9 trillion.
Now, I just want to switch gears a little bit and ask you about China. A group of your colleagues penned a letter to President Biden in concern of the U.S.'s relationship with China in regard to trade. China has failed to meet its end of the bargain in the Phase 1 trade deal with the U.S. How do you think this should be dealt with?
Well, look, the problem's much deeper and more persistent than that. China promised, as part of the terms and conditions of being a member of the World Trade Organization, to be a market economy. I mean, they're not a market economy. They're a state-sponsored economy. And when companies compete against Chinese companies, they're competing against a whole-of-government approach from China. Their national intelligence apparatus, all of the resources of the Chinese government, depending on the sector, are aimed at making sure the Chinese companies win and the foreign competitors lose. And so really we need to be building, alliances, allies around the world, other WTO member nations, to hold China accountable, not just to their Phase 1 deal with Donald Trump, but to their broader commitment to the global trade community as part of the World Trade Organizations. And I think fundamentally we'll be better positioned if we multiply our allies than if we multiply our enemies when it comes to trade.
Now, you did just touch upon a few areas here, but is there a path to a symbiotic trade relationship with China?
I mean, in my view, the only path to a symbiotic trade relationship is China does what they said they would do, is become a market economy. Unfortunately, China has already done to many American companies what they've done to many Hong Kong companies and many Taiwanese companies, which is they've flooded them with capital and opportunities, and they've got companies like Nike saying they're a Chinese company. They've got General Motors, where their largest customer segment's now China, not America. And companies tend to follow their financial interests. And in a way, yeah, they have a fiduciary duty to their shareholders to do that. But for the United States of America, we need to be clear that we have free, fair, and open trade, not state-sponsored trade. And I don't think the right way to compete with China is to get better at the same game China is rigging to help China. I think the right way to do it is to go back to the system of free and fair trade that China signed up for. And, we need to build allies in that fight, because China doesn't just do this to the United States of America. They do that to all the countries. And you go back to COVID, China was telling countries like France, yeah, we can get you some personal protective equipment as long as you use Huawei for 5G. Two unrelated things. You're like, who does this? Well, China does that, and they do it to everyone.
Congressman Warren Davidson, always great to have your perspective. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shirking executive privilege, President Biden is ordering the release of former President Trump's White House visitor logs. The log of visitor appointments while Trump was in the White House will go to the January 6th committee. Members of the panel are interested in the Trump rally that took place at the Ellipse on the morning of January 6, 2021. They want to know how the rally was organized and financed. Among their questions is how close the organizers of the rally coordinated with White House officials. Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal and Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn have introduced a bill to enhance children's safety online. The Kids Online Safety Act came after reports that Facebook usage could be harmful to teen girls' mental health. Senator Blumenthal said big tech was unwilling to change despite many stories of physical and emotional damage to young users. Parents would have tools to protect their kids and an option to disable so-called addictive features. Platforms would be responsible for mitigating harm to minors, especially as it pertains to suicide, eating disorders, substance abuse, and sexual exploitation. Coastlines in the U.S. are expected to rise. That's according to a federal study released Tuesday. A National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration report says that by 2050, water along the U.S. shore will be almost a foot higher, and in parts of Louisiana and Texas, as much as 1.5 feet higher. The projected rise in sea level in the next 30 years is expected to be equivalent to that of the past 100 years. More flooding and damage along the coastlines are expected. The recent NOAA study updates the federal government's 2017 sea level rise projections and will serve as guidance for the administration's climate change initiatives. Now we have some exciting news. Shen is back in D.C. The show presents a China before communism, along with a message of hope.
My goodness, I mean, have you heard the crowd? And no one has left, which for Washington, D.C. is very unusual. Okay, people are enjoying it immensely.
B.J. Penn served as acting Secretary of the Navy during the Obama administration. Penn has been watching Shen Yun for several years.
The beauty, the message, the skill and the talent of the performers is just really remarkable.
He appreciates the positive energy from the show and says it means even more during the pandemic.
The heart, from the heart. They feel it, and I think the audience feels it as well. I'm elevated. I feel good. I feel good, you know. All is not right with the world, but with the performance, it is. The spirit is high, and you want good things to happen to everyone.
In 2 hours, Shen Yun showcases 5,000 years of traditional Chinese civilization. Penn says Shen Yun is on an important mission.
It's a very strong message they're putting out. They're responsible for. I see that in this performance. It's very obvious that the CCP is not the party of choice.
Last night, Shen Yun performed to a full house at the Kennedy Center and will be there for the rest of the week with shows going on until Sunday. You can check out more at shenyun.com for ticket information. And that's all we have for you on the Capitol Report this evening. Thank you for tuning in. From Washington, D.C., I'm Steve Lance, and we'll see you tomorrow.